Hi everyone, it's Kelly from Kellie's Bead Boutique. So have you ever tried a barrel knot? I know a lot of people do and really struggle with it. So I've developed a way to make them just so much easier. And if you follow my channel, you know that I use barrel knots all the time. I love them. I love the look. I like how easy they are to create because of a little trick that I taught myself. And also I love how easy you can just mix them into all of your jewelry. So I've taken 3 of my favorite bracelets, I've put them together for this video, and at the end of this, you're going to be a master at making barrel knots. So if you want to see what I'm making today, come and join me. Okay, so to make my knotty wrap, we're only going to be using a pair of scissors or a pair of cutters, doesn't matter which ones you use. I'm going to be using a little bit of GS Hypo cement, of course our barrel knot tube. I've got a beautiful tiara cast button. We've got 2 different colors of 6/0 Miyuki seed beads and about 2 meters of 1mm leather cording. So let's get started. So to figure out your sizing for this bracelet, what you need to do is to take a loose measurement of your wrist. So let's say that your wrist is approximately 7 inches, and that's not a really tight measurement. You want it, and I don't mean loose as in like an extra inch, but I don't mean tight either. So sort of, just a nice, loose, comfortable measurement, because this is going to be a double wrap, so we don't want it tight against our skin. So if my wrist measures out about 7 inches, I'm going to take that and I'm going to double that. So now I have 14 inches. Now I'm going to add another 8 inches, and so I come up with a total of 22. So whatever your measurement is, so if it's 16, you're going to add 16 plus 8. If you've got a 6-inch wrist, you're going to take 12 plus 8. So whatever your wrist measurement is, times it by 2 and add 8. And that's just so that we have enough working leather. So I'm going to find 22 inches on here. So I've got 12 and 10. And again, this doesn't have to be an exact sort of measurement, but we do want to make sure that we're not taking up too much of our leather. So what I tend to do is I just hold it in my non-dominant hand. I then pick up my button and I run my piece through there until I can grab hold of the end. And this one is not cooperating with me today. Sometimes it doesn't. There we go. So now I'm going to just bring that down to that little area there, and again, it doesn't have to be an exact measurement. So now I've got my shorter piece on the bottom, and that's the one that we're going to be placing or wrapping around our wrist, and then I've got my long one on top, and that's the one that I'm going to be doing my wraps with. So you always want to make sure in this project that you're wrapping with your long one. So I'm going to take my little barrel knot tube, I'm going to place that in there, and I'm going to take my long one on the top and I'm going to bring that down and towards me, and then I'm going to wrap 3 times. And I want to make sure that the wraps are always going towards the left there, nice and neat, not on top of each other. Now I'm going to grab hold of that knot, and then I'm going to take this long one and come through the back side and push it through, grab hold of the knot again, and then pull that tube out and pull down. So I know you can't see the knot, but I have to hold on to it. Now when I get to this point, I'm going to sort of shimmy it down, and what I do is I push it with my fingers like that, and then I start to slowly tighten it. Now, of course, I've done these barrel knots on a million of my tutorials, but I very seldom use 1mm leather because it's very delicate. So you don't want to be pushing on this leather and like reefing on it, because you will break it. Of course it's strong enough to make a project with, but you don't want to give a really good tug like you can with 1.5mm or the 2mm. So make sure that you're just sort of pushing and pulling gently, but you want to sort of nudge that into position. And you can see I've left about a 1/4 inch gap. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start my pattern. So on the first one, and it doesn't matter which side you start on, I'm going to take one of my blue, one of my yellow, and one of my blue. And this will be in a kit, and we've got 3 beautiful color choices. And then I'm going to take one of my blue, one of my yellow, and one of my blue. And these are those beautiful Picasso beads that you guys all love so much. So I thought I have to include those in this project. So now I sort of push them down and create like a little bundle like this. Now I want to make sure my long one's on the top, and it's not. So I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to do a barrel knot. So I want to make sure that I'm getting pretty close here, because it can get a little hard when you've got it up here and you're trying to push it down. So I want to have it fairly close to what where I'm trying to aim. So I'm going to bring this in front, wrap towards the back once, twice, 3 times. Now this is probably the most challenging of the knots using the 1mm leather. I find it very, I don't know, it's just a little more delicate to work with, in that it doesn't want to go into position. So you might end up fighting with it a little bit more than the heavier leathers. So just be patient with it and don't rush. So when I get to this point, this is where it can often go kind of wrong. So I'm very careful about sort of just guiding that into place gently with my fingers like that, like I literally do go this slow. And if that one wants to pop under, I just kind of pull it apart, and I'm being very gentle with it. Make sure it's right where I want, and then I tighten it up. Now, one of the things you want to make sure when you've got this one here, the short one, will move in and out here. You can actually move that one around. So you don't want to have these so that you've got one big side and one short side here. So be mindful that both of the pieces of leather are creating sort of an I shape here. So once I get that into position, I'm going to give that a little tighten up with I just push my thumbnail against it and tighten it up. Now these aren't supposed to be tight in here, they're supposed to be sort of free flowing like that. So that's exactly the look that we want. Now I'm going to continue with the pattern. So now on the next one we opposite the pattern. So now I'm going to go with the yellow and the blue and then the yellow. And then repeat that on the long one. And I did it this way just because it gives it a little more visual interest. To have the contrasting colors going opposite. You can do whatever you want on yours, but I just think it looks a little bit nicer like this. So now I've got my long one at the top, so I want to push those down, get them in position, take my barrel knot tube, I come in very close to that one, make sure I go under and towards the back, wrap once, twice, 3 times, grab hold of that knot. Always grab hold of it. It'll give you a lot more control. Find your end, come through the tube, grab hold of the knot again, pull the tube out. Get that just about where you want, and now you can have a look at it. So now I'm going to start squishing it backwards to get it into position, and once it's pretty much where I want it, then I can start pulling it tight. And this is also a nice thing that if you don't tighten it up and it kind of goes wonky on you, you can easily undo it at this point. So you can see I really take my time, get that into position, and then I kind of push it in. But again, I'm not pulling tight on this. I'm just pulling tight enough to tighten up the knots. I'm not pulling so tight that I break my leather. Okay, so there's our second one, and I'll do one more here so you can see the pattern. So now I ended with the yellow, so I'm going to start with the blue. So I'll go blue, and then yellow, and blue, and then we've got our blue, and the yellow, and the blue. And you'll get enough leather and beads in your kit to probably go up to more than about an 8.5 to almost a 9-inch wrist. So this will sort of fit for everybody. So my short one's on the top, so I want to turn it over so that my long one's on the top. Make sure these are pushed down. Pick up my little barrel knot tube, and I'm going to take this and pull it around to the front from the back. Work to my left 3 times. Grab hold of that knot. Find the long end, push it through, pull that out, and then push that into position. And I mean, it's not hard. I'm just giving you a little, you know, when I was making these, I found that they can be a little persnickety, so I want to give you that warning in advance. That's a technical term. Didn't you not know that? Persnickety? that you could have some challenges with this. So just you want to take your time and not just start, you know, pulling on it like crazy or trying to get them into position too fast, because they just won't turn out nice. So there's the beginning parts of the bracelet. So now, through the magic of television, I have one that's almost completed, and I'm going to switch to that one. Okay, so I have my other color with my beautiful green Picasso and the smoky topaz. Oh gosh, this is my favorite one, and I've used that beautiful beachy color leather, so this one is my favorite. So I've got my last one on here, and I'll explain a little bit of the sizing once I get this done. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to do my last wrap. So again, it's just going to be like a regular one. So once, twice, 3 times. Making sure it's with my long one. And you can see we've got lots of leftover leather, but that's to make sure that we can fit for all sizes on this. So get that into position, push it back, and then tighten it up. There we go. So that's my last one. So the way that I've kind of done this is I sort of looked at some of the sizing, and what I kind of figured out is that if you have about a 6-inch wrist, you're going to have about 18 of these little sections of 3. If you have a 7-inch wrist, you're going to go about 21 inches, because by the time we have our not 21 inches, sorry, 21 sections. By the time we add our ending and our button, that sort of accounts for that. So depending on the size of your wrist, you may have to add or subtract, but that's kind of what I have figured out is approximately 18 sections for a 6 and 20 or 21 for a 7. So again, everybody has different size wrists, so you'll sort of have to figure out how the sizing works for you. So now what I want to do is take my button and place it in between the leather, and I want to give sort of an approximate size. So I know that I want to have about, you know, around here. On this particular one, you want to make sure that your button is not too tight. Because it's only 1 millimeter leather, it will take a little bit more punishment than the a little bit heavier leathers. So you don't want to have this so tight that it stresses this out. Now, if it ever does break on you, the good thing is that your beads will still be intact. You would just need some more leather. So, okay, so now I'm going to take my barrel knot tube and place it in between. And it doesn't matter if it's the long or the short one because we're at the end. So I'm going to make a barrel knot at that approximate location, and so I'm going to go 3 times, bring my end through, and then before I tighten it up, I just make sure that it's the right, like see how big that is? So I'm going to push it down until it's just about in the right location, and then I'm going to sort of, you know, that looks like it's about perfect. So then I'm going to tighten it up. And what I do is I sort of look where I want it, and I want it to be about right there. So I place my thumbnails there, and that's where I push my knot against, and then the knot won't go any further than I want it to. So then on the ends, you can embellish in whichever way that you want. You may have a few leftover beads. So on one side, I'm just going to put one color bead, and then I'm just going to do a little wrap. So I'm just going to go once, twice, and take that, go through the end. And you can do anything you want. You don't have to embellish. You can just trim off. It's your piece. You can make it look exactly like you want. If you want, you can leave these long so that they dangle. You can add additional things or some metal beads or whatever you want. But I'm just going to do a little embellishment on mine. So go once, twice, go through the end. That's what I love about this tube, is it really just helps keep things consistent. Now I don't want to have these side by side. I want to have this one a little bit longer, because when they go side by side, I don't think they look as nice. So just going to make sure that one doesn't get out of place. There we go, tighten that up. Okay, so now you can see it's just a cute little embellishment. So now I'm going to trim it off. And now you want to make sure that you do use some glue. because this is going to take all the punishment down here. So I'm just going to remove this. And I'm going to put a little dab of glue on the ends of these, just a little tiny dab. Find the sort of open part of the knot there. And then I'm going to put a little blob of glue here. And it looks like a lot, but it'll dry clear. And then a little bit there. And then we're going to let that dry. So there you go. Here's our completed knotty wraps. I love these ones. I think I say that in every video, don't I? I need to come up with something new to say at the end of them. I'm loving the color combinations of these. I've got the Picasso in the red and the black, and I've used a silver, and I've got a black leather in here. And then I've got my favorite one here with the sort of beachy colored gray leather and the green and the smoky topaz. And then the one that I started at the beginning here with the blue and the yellow. So you'll get your choice of whatever kind of Picasso colors that you want. You get your color of metals, and you'll also get the color to choose for your leather. Okay, so our parts today are going to include some 2mm leather, and I have about 50 inches here or so. I also have some large hole beads, and these ones are about 10mm, and if you buy a kit you'll get the whole strand so that you have lots of beads to choose from. And we're only going to be using a pair of sharp scissors and a little bit of GS Hypo. And we're also going to be using one of our barrel knot tubes. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is make my clasp. And so I'm going to turn back about 2 or 3 inches of my leather, and I'm going to have my long one on top. I always want to have that on top as a reminder of which one I'm going to be using to do the wrapping with. So now I'm going to take my barrel knot tube, and I'm going to place it in between the 2 pieces of leather, and I'm going to make a 3 wrap barrel knot. So I'm going to go around once, twice, 3 times, always working towards my left hand. Then I'm going to take the end and I'm going to pop it through the back end of the tube, pull the tube out. You can see I'm still holding on to that knot. I always want to make sure that I know where my knot is and that it's not going to fall apart. Now we don't need a very big clasp on this, so what I'm going to do is pull this one here, just the short one, and that will shorten it up. And I know it's a little bit wasteful, but it's a whole lot easier to make knots when you're not trying to scrimp on a little teeny tiny bit. So we want this clasp to be about the size of your bead. So I'm going to start to make it a little bit smaller. So what I do to make sure that I'm not making it in the wrong place is I take my thumbnail and I place it about where I want that knot. So I'm going to start cinching up that knot, and I just kind of push it into place. And now I'm going to take it and try and get it through a bead. And that's about perfect. What I want is the bead, you can see that the bead kind of takes up the entire circle there. This will stretch out ever so slightly, but you don't want it so big that it falls off because you need a little bit of tension to hold it on your wrist. So that's about perfect. So I'm going to take that out. Now I'm going to place my thumbnail back there again, and now I'm going to really tighten that up. So I just pull and pull and pull. Be careful that you don't break your leather, so you want to make sure that you're pulling in the right places. And then now I'm going to take my sharp scissors and I'm going to trim this little tail off, and you will see a bit of it. So if it really bothers you, you can always take a little bit of a black Sharpie or something like that and just kind of dab on there, and that will help take away some of that brightness. So why don't I go grab a Sharpie and I'll show you what I mean. So a nice little trick is just take your Sharpie and just kind of dab on the end, and it doesn't really matter what color your leather is, because now you can see just with a little tiny bit of Sharpie, it kind of takes away that glaringly obvious part that I cut that. So it's just kind of a little trick there. So now I'm going to take some of my GS Hypo. So I want to make sure that I get enough glue on here that it will stop this knot from opening up. So I'm not like bathing in it, but I do have a fair amount, and I'm going to put a little dab on this side too. So I'm just going to wait for a couple minutes while that dries. Okay, so I'm just about dry on here, so I think we can get started. So one of the things you want to do first is take your scissors and cut a little bit of a sharp angle on the end. You'll find that the leather can get a bit blunt, and it can make it a little bit hard to go through the beads. So I'm going to pop on one of these beautiful drusies. Now, we do have many different colors for kits available on this one, but a lot of them are limited, and I think the druzy is one of the ones that are limited. Now, I am going on a buying trip in a little while, and I'm hoping I can get some more, but I think this one is so pretty mixed with this antique purple leather. And we're going to choose the leather for you, so you don't even have to go to that trouble, so it's just picking out the kits. It's going to be super simple. Okay, so I have my bead on there. So now I'm going to be doing a double barrel knot in between. So I'm going to take my tube and place it above my leather because I'm just working with one piece of leather this time. So now I'm going to wrap around and I'm going to work towards my left hand. I do 2 wraps and then I take my end, run it through the back, pull the tube out and give it a pull. And I don't pull it tight because I want to make sure I can get that into position before I tighten it up. So I want to get that into position. And I find that my nails are sort of a really good bonus on this. It does kind of help push them around. So now we have a nice little double barrel knot in there. So now I'm going to take my end again, find another bead, and put that through. And if you find that you can't get your leather through one side of your bead, turn your bead over and try going the other way. The way that they make these beads, they start on one side and then they go on the other. So often you can have one side that's a little bit more narrow than the other side, but usually your leather will slip right through. So making another double barrel knot. And this one kind of got away from me, but I recovered it. Okay, so now I'm just going to push that in between. So I do want these sandwiched in nice and tight. I don't want a lot of give in there. You'll find that this bracelet will loosen up over time when you wear it, so you don't want to have it loose to start off with. So I'll show you a couple more and then I'll show you how I end this. So I put on my bead, take my tube, place it on top of my leather, do 1 wrap towards me and 1 towards my left hand, take the end, run it through the tube and pull that through. And then I make sure that this first one here is not going over the second one. If it does that, you'll notice right away that your barrel knot didn't work out, and that's the best time is to pull it out and redo it before you tighten it up. Okay, so I'm going to put another bead on and I'm going to turn this so that the good part is up. Now I'm going to put my tube up, make 1 wrap and make a wrap towards the left, take the end, put it through, and then put that into position. So it just takes a little bit of fussing around to make sure it slips in there. So I'm just going to finish up this bracelet and I will come back and show you how I end it. Okay, so I've got all of my beads on there and all my little double wraps. So the way that I'm going to end this is I'm going to take 1 final bead. So I'll explain a little bit more about the sizing and how many I've used at the end. So I'm going to take my last bead and I'm going to place it on. And then I'm going to do just not a double one, but just a sort of a single knot. So I'm just going to go around once, and you don't even really need the tube. I just find that it makes it easier for pushing the knot in place where I want it. So I'm just going to make a single knot, and I'm going to push that down nice and tight towards that last bead there. I'm going to get that in there nice and snug. And then I'm going to give this a trim. So I want to leave a little tiny tail, not much. I could cut that down a little bit more. And again, we can take our Sharpie just so that we don't have those glaringly obvious cuts. And nobody would ever be the wiser that this is, purple leather and that I've used a black Sharpie. So then I'm going to take a little bit of GS Hypo. Oops, this one's quite stringy today. So I'm not going to use a ton of it, but I am going to soak that pretty good on both sides of that cut there. I just don't want it dripping all over the place, but you also don't want this to come apart. So I'm going to let that dry and I'm going to show you how this whole bracelet works. Okay, so I have my bracelet that I made earlier, and this one is with the beautiful magnesite and the beachy colored leather. So you can see the way that this ends. It just literally goes inside that. You pop it on there, and then that is a little bit of resistance when you've got it on. I didn't think that this would work. I thought, okay, well, once you put it on, it's going to work its way out. But if you make this loop small enough, it doesn't. I had my staff test it out yesterday in the store to make sure that it didn't come off, and it actually works pretty good because you've got that little bit of resistance there. So I think the key is to make sure that you make this loop just barely big enough to go over top of that, and then you try not to stretch it out too much. But I think this is kind of like the perfect solution. I get a lot of emails asking, what can I make for a man when where I don't have a clasp? And I'm always scratching my head going, well, what can you use? And I think this one would actually work really nicely for a man. So we are going to have all kinds of really great colors. And like I said before, we will pick the leathers out for you, so you won't even have to do that. So you'll get enough to do a full bracelet. This one has 13 in total, and this one fits about a 6.5 to a 6 3/4 wrist. And this one has 14 in total, and it fits about a 7 1/4 inch wrist. So just by adding one bead, it makes quite a big difference on the sizing on it. But I think these are really pretty. They take literally no time at all to make. And I think, again, it's going to be great, perfect for people that don't like clasps or that are allergic to metals. And I think it's just kind of something a little bit different. So to make our project today, we're going to be using about 32 inches of 2mm leather. I have 60 4mm fire polish. I'm going to be using one of our barrel knot tubes. We'll be using a little bit of super new glue. We'll also be using some 24 gauge craft wire. I've got some small jump rings, a toggle, some glue in ends, and for our tools we're going to be using a pair of cutters, our chain nose pliers, and our bent chain nose pliers. So let's get started. I've cut myself about 30 inches of my wire, and what I'm going to do on one end is just take a pair of pliers and just make sort of a little turn. All I want is something that's going to prevent the beads from flying off the end. Now, I've got 3 different colorways in this project. 2 of them are going to be a pattern one, where you're going to be using 2 beads, and then you're going to put on one of the different color. So you put 2 and then a different color, and then 2 and then a different color, because you'll get 40 of one and 20 of the other. But in this particular color, I just think these are fabulous. I call them oil slick. I know they're called metallic something or other, but my supplier doesn't give me names, so I get to make up my own. And I thought this looked just like, you know how in an oil slick you see all those different colors? And that's what this looked like to me, so that's why I called it oil slick. I just think these are fabulous, and they didn't need to go with anything else because we get all the different purples and browns and blues and greens and everything in this one. So we're just going to load all of these beads on. If you choose the other colors in your kits, you'll do 2 of one color and 1 of the other one. So I'm just going to load these up and I will be right back. Okay, so I've got all of my beads on my wire, and now I know this is far too much wire, but I like to give you a little bit extra in your kits because wire is notorious for kinking in the wrong places. So if you get a kink up here when we're about to start and you need a little bit extra, all you have to do is push your beads down and you'll have plenty of wire. So I always think it's better to have a little more than a little less. So now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be wrapping this around here. So what I'm going to do is leave myself a couple inches of wire, and I'm going to put it next to the barrel knot tube. And this thing comes in handy for all kinds of things. Now, it would also work if you had a knitting needle and not a barrel knot tube, but it's just what I had, and I thought, well, you're going to get one in the kit anyway, so let's utilize it. So I'm going to take my thumb and I'm going to place it between the wire and the tube so I've got a good grip on something, and it's just to get this started is a little awkward. So I'm going to slip down some of the beads here. And this is why we want to have that little thing in the end, because you don't want your beads to end up all over the floor. So now I'm going to use my thumbnail as a bit of resistance, and I'm going to push with this thumbnail so that I get these in there tight. You see how they're not loose like that? They're nice and snug. Now I can wrap around like that. So I just wrap around as far as I can go, and then I'm going to slip down some more beads. So I just slip down as many as are sort of comfortable in my hand, and then I'm going to wrap that around. And then what I'm going to do now is just take that end and just kind of give it a little bend like that, because we don't want these beads falling off the end. Now I'm going to take the tube and just sort of push it up so I've got a little bit more of a tool to work with. So we just keep repeating this process. So give it some resistance. You have to push against it so that you've got all of your beads nicely sort of snugged up there. Otherwise this doesn't really turn out well. So you can see how I'm sort of pushing against, and we're creating our nice little spiral. And you will see that beads will start to come off the end there. So you can just kind of wrap it around a little bit, but we can fix that all up later. Okay, so I'm just about done here. I've got a couple more that I need to do. So we create our resistance and then wrap around. And this looks a little more awkward than it actually is. It's much easier to do these things when I'm not on camera, but you can see I can just sort of keep pushing this tube up. Just sort of push up there. And then we've got our little exposed tube there. Okay, so this is the last one. So just make sure you're nice and tight and just wrap all the way to the end. So now we've got our little tube of beads there, and we can get rid of this barrel knot tube for now. So there you go. Now I'm going to take my leather and I'm just going to fold it in half and I'm going to cut it. And of course, yes, scissors would be great, but I don't have any. So I'm using my cutters. So now we're going to make a barrel knot. So I'm going to go about 2 to 3 inches down, and then I'm going to make my first barrel knot. So I want to make sure my ends are equal, and then I'm going to place my barrel knot tube in between, and I'm going to give that a wrap. So I'm going to do a 3 wrap. So I go take my most outer one and go under and around, working towards my left hand. So I've got 3 nice neat wraps. I'm going to take the one that I was wrapping with and put it through the back end of the tube. I'm going to pop that little tube off and pull that out. So normally I would tighten this right up. I would get it nice and snug. But what I'm going to do is try and hide the wire with this a little bit. So I want to leave it just a little bit undone there, but enough so that it doesn't fall apart. So I want to make sure everything's nice and even, and then get these kind of almost snugged up, but not quite. There we go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the end of the leather, and what I do is I just kind of meet them up. It's a little bit easier to get this in here. And I want to start on this end. I just find it easier to work with my beads coming towards me versus away. It's just the way that my brain thinks. So I'm going to come in this end, and I want to put both of those through. And you might have to sort of straighten that out. There we go. Just kind of pops right through. So one end is going to be longer than the other because when we do barrel knots, it makes them uneven. Okay, so now what I want to do is take this end of the wire and I want to wrap it around the leather here, just these 2 pieces of leather. I want to make sure that you guys can see everything. So I'm going to move all this stuff. So I'm going to take this little piece here and I'm going to wrap it really close to that barrel knot. And I'm just going to wrap it a few times. And all I'm doing is securing that, so it doesn't have to look like anything special. Now I'm going to come in and carefully cut that wire away. Now I'm going to take my chain nose pliers and just push down on that little bit of wire that's poking up there. You don't want that sticking out. Okay, so now we can really tighten up that barrel knot. So I'm just going to move these beads down, and then I'm going to find the piece of leather that will tighten it up. And let's see, it's not that one, it's that one. So I just want to tighten that up over top of that little bit of wire there. And you just kind of move it around and pull. Sorry, I'm pushing and pulling because I don't want to destroy this. So I'm sort of pulling on the leather down this way, and then I'm pushing up like that. So there we go. So if it shows a little bit, it doesn't really matter. It's not a big deal. All we wanted to do was really secure that in there. So now I'm going to take this end and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to wrap it around a couple times to secure. So just wrap it around 3 times, and then I'm going to give that a little trim. And now if I've got a little burr, I'm just going to tuck that down. So now I want to create another barrel knot. So I'm going to look for my longer piece because there's 2 different lengths here. So I've got my longer one on top, and I'm going to take my tube and place it in between, and take the top one and come underneath and towards me and go around once, twice, 3 times. And then I'm going to take that tail and go through the back end of the tube. A lot of people ask me, well, which end do you go through? You always want to go through the back end. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a piece of leather over top. And we don't want that. We don't want to see the leather. It should be internal. Okay, so now when we're going to tighten up this barrel knot, we want to make sure we scoosh it down as far as we can get it before we tighten it up, because we want to cover over that last little bit of wire that we used on our wrap. So just kind of cover up what you can here. And you know, this wire is super malleable, so this one's sticking out a little bit. So I'm just going to force it down with my tool. There we go. Kind of cover it up a bit more there with our leather. and then tighten up. So, and you'll find on this, with the barrel knots, one will tighten and the other won't. So you kind of have to play around a little bit to get it right where you want it. Now you can see we've got way too much leather on one side. It really doesn't matter. I just give you extra leather because it's way easier to make these barrel knots with more leather than a little bit less. You'll find you'll really struggle if you're trying to cheap out on your leather. So although it is wasteful, it's impossible to make these with just tiny little bits of leather. All right, so now what we want to do is kind of move these around. Now this one actually worked out really nicely, but what I do to kind of tighten it up is I just sort of twist these. And I just kind of come down and I'm twisting away from me. And I want them to sort of be even all over, but if they're not, it doesn't really matter because this is a really organic looking piece. So that's sort of what we're going for. We've just got our beautiful check glass in the middle and our barrel knots on either side. All right, so now we need to measure. So by the time we add on our toggle and our end caps and our jump rings, this whole little scenario is going to be about 1 inch of length. So if your wrist measures out at about 7 inches, then we want to make this about 6 inches, and that should give you what you need. Now it's a little bit awkward to measure because we have so many different lengths. So what I like to do is I like to measure this piece. So this ends up just over 2 inches. So I want to make this a 7-inch bracelet. So I need to make this entire piece 6 inches long. So because I want 6 inches and this is 2 inches, I need 2 inches of leather on either side of my barrel knots, and that should give me the length that I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my one barrel knot and go to the end, and I'm going to come up here and just kind of mark with my thumb, and I'm going to trim off 2 inches there. And I'm going to repeat on the other side. So put my barrel knot there and come up to the 2 inches and give that a trim. So now when I measure this, this should come out to 6 inches, which it does. Now, if you have a really teeny tiny wrist, like some people only have a 6-inch wrist, you don't want to end up with this sort of scenario because that's going to look really silly. So what I would do is if you have a really small wrist, is I would cut back the amount of beads that you put in here. So instead of 60, I might go down to something like 50 so that you end up with a smaller section. Otherwise, you're going to have too much on the top here and it's just not going to sit right on your wrist. Now, when you do put this on, you sort of have to mold it around a little bit, so it will take up a little bit of room, but I think maybe just go a little bit less if you have a really tiny wrist. All right, so now we're going to glue our ends on, and I'm going to be using some super new glue. You can use this or Loctite, or you can use GS Hypo. I just find with the GS Hypo that it's not an instant kind of thing, and you'll be waiting a couple hours for it to set. So I just want to put a little bit on the end, and then on the very tips of it. It doesn't look like very much glue, but this stuff does really hold. And then I'm going to take my end caps and pop them in there. Now, a good thing to do, which I didn't do, is to dry fit them to make sure they are going to fit. If you take them and you kind of push them over and they don't fit, you could trim them off. Now, the other thing is when you put this super new glue on your leather, it can make it swell up just ever so slightly. So you want to be fairly quick when you're getting your glue on there. You want to be fairly quick at getting your end caps on because once it starts to swell up, you'll have a heck of a time getting that on there. Now always make sure that you've got something to clean up a little bit of extra glue. I don't have anything, so I'm just going to use a little bit of my cut off leather just in case there's sort of an overflow of glue. It's just nice to remove a bit, although this does dry very clear. So I'm just going to let that set up for a minute and then I'll be right back. All right, so let's finish up this bracelet. So I'm going to add my toggle, and when I add that, I'm going to use 1 jump ring on one side and 3 on the other, and I'll explain as I do this. So to open them up, I'm going to put 1 tool on one side, and I turn my bent chain nose over so I've got a little more grip on that, and I just do an opposite. Now I'm going to put my jump ring through, and now I'm going to add the round end of my toggle, and I get that in there, turn around my pliers, and close that up nice and tight. If you struggle with closing your jump rings, you can sort of jiggle them back and forth until they pop in there. Sometimes, like this one, isn't cooperating, so I just go over top of the whole thing and I give it a squench, and then it kind of pops right in where it needs to be. Now, the reason that I add 3 is because if you only add 1 jump ring to the working end of the toggle, it sometimes just doesn't want to go up inside the rounded end. It just puts too much stress on it, so I like to put 3. So I put 1 on, And then I have to add one more in there to give me that length that I need. And then I need one more to reorient the whole thing, because otherwise your toggle end is going to be the wrong way. So I'm going to just keep opening these up. So open up, and I'm going to go through the last one here. And I do want to make sure that these are going the right direction, because these are like a one-sided, so I've got that really pretty textured side. So I want to make sure that's going the right way. And then I'm going to come in and do that up nice and snug. So there you go, there's our completed pieces. There's the oil slick that I was working on today. And this one is actually a blue with a green. It's kind of hard to tell in the light here, but just that little bit of extra green gives it a little bit of dimension. I love the color of that one. And then of course this is my favorite, because I always love this color combo of turquoise and brown. And this is all in matte, so it looks great with this sort of beachy distressed gray. I think it looks fabulous. So if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give me a like, leave me a comment. I love to hear from everybody. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please make sure that you do so. I want to thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.